Melissa Marie Rocuba was born on July 23, 1969, in Bristol, Pennsylvania, to parents Joseph White and the late Virginia Twombly. She was raised in Cape May Courthouse, New Jersey, and graduated from Middle Township High School. Melissa was a devoted mother and later in life spent much of her time caring for her grandchildren. Her family often referred to her as a stay-at-home grandma. She enjoyed quad riding with her husband Bruno, trips to the casino, and spending time at the beach. By 2013, Bruno and she had been married for 24 years and were living in Simpson, Pennsylvania. That same year, a horrific tragedy occurred that destroyed the Rocubas' lives forever. On August 6, 2013, just before 10 p.m., Melissa and Bruno arrived home from a night out. A few hours later, at 4:20 a.m., Bruno called 911 to say that he was playing around with a gun when it accidentally went off and struck Melissa in the head. The bullet had also passed through his own hand before hitting Melissa. Here's part of that 911 call.
Okay, was it self-inflicted?
No, we were fighting.
You said you guys were arguing?
No, we were playing around with the gun when we were shooting it. Well, we were going to go shooting, and I pulled the trigger and it went through my hand. I was playing with the gun and I let it go off.
Bruno then called his daughter, who lived right next door, and told her about the accident, but said her mother was fine. In a panic, she ran over to the house and found her mother covered in blood on the bed. She grabbed a towel and held it on the wound until emergency services arrived. Bruno, meanwhile, was somewhere else in the house on the phone, not helping. At one point, she asked him what happened, and he told her a completely different story. Here's that audio of that conversation.
Dad, why did this happen? She came home, she wanted to take the gun out and play, and I told her, no, we're not doing that.
Once the ambulance was there, Melissa was rushed to the hospital. She spent 3 days in critical condition before dying at 1:45 a.m. on August 10th. Her family was devastated, but accidents do happen, just not in this case. Here is footage of Bruno explaining what happened on the night Melissa was shot in an alleged freak accident.
My wife was home alone all last week, so I left in top drawer on the nightstand for her because of recent break-ins. So we were both in bed, and I reached over. I grabbed it. My wife was sitting on the bed on that side. I was on this side, and I pulled the trigger by accident. I went to check the chamber to see if there was a round in there.
Okay.
I went like this, and she was sitting in the bed there. And I went like this, and she was watching TV. And I just went like this. And she leaned back toward me, and I must have pulled it away and then shot through my hand.
While her death was never formally ruled an accident, there were also no arrests made and no charges filed, at least not at the time. 9 years later, in early 2022, Pennsylvania State Police began poring over old unsolved cases and decided to do a deep dive into Melissa's murder. What they found shocked everyone. In the case files was home security footage that was never fully examined, mainly because investigators at the time assumed nothing critical was on it. They also lacked the necessary equipment to properly retrieve the audio from the footage. In the footage, you can see the couple arguing before they even go in the house. Once inside, the arguing continues and only stops the moment the gun is fired. With the new evidence in hand, Bruno was arrested and charged with Melissa's murder on June 3, 2022.
Who got your license plate out here?
Where? What?
Yeah. All right, hold up, right here. Hey, you ever got any guns on you?
No.
All right, put your hands behind your back.
Okay.
Investigators believe that Bruno was standing over Melissa on the bed with his left hand on her head to hold her down while he threatened her with the .40 caliber pistol in his right hand. As she struggled to get away, Bruno fired a single shot that passed through his left hand and into Melissa's head. In the end, he pleaded guilty to third-degree murder and was sentenced to 12 to 40 years in prison. Based on time already served, he's expected to be eligible for parole beginning in 2035. Dorothy Alice Tate, who went by Toby, was born in Dallas, Texas, and while her exact birth date is unknown, it's believed she was born in 1942. After graduating from high school in Arlington, Texas, she moved to Estes Park, Colorado, and worked as a bartender and waitress, then later as a teacher for children in a private home. While she loved Colorado, she had a desire to study biology and medicinal healing, which brought her to British Columbia, Canada. There, she lived on property owned and inhabited by a local shaman and learned about herbology and local indigenous tribes. She then built her own traditional communal home, known as a longhouse. By November 1983, her time in British Columbia had come to an end, after she made plans to move back to Estes Park, Colorado, even purchasing a house beforehand. It was something she always dreamed of, but sadly would never get to experience because her life was stolen in a senseless tragedy. On November 15, 1983, someone called 911 to report a suspicious van parked at a Scenic Overlook on Highway 1, just under 3 miles north of Hearst Castle in San Simeon, California. When police arrived, they found a 1980 Chevy van with both side windows smashed out. It was Toby's van, and under it was one of her dogs, a blue Queensland Heeler, and the other dog was found inside. In the driver's seat was Toby, dead from a gunshot wound. Her driver's side window had been shattered by a gunshot, which also hit Toby as she was probably trying to escape. Her van was still moving when it hit the back of another parked car, which investigators believe may have belonged to the suspect. It was determined that the murder weapon was a .45 caliber pistol. The last time anyone saw her alive was the previous afternoon on November 14, 1983, when she checked into the San Simeon State Campground. She'd been traveling through California, heading back to Colorado from British Columbia. Investigators searched her van and collected blood they believed belonged to the killer. They also discovered that a camera had been stolen and later turned up at a pawn shop, but by then it had changed hands so many times it never led to any arrest. Unfortunately, due to the randomness of the crime, it went unsolved for the next 43 years. In 2018, a cold case team decided to make it their focus, and by 2023, they had enlisted the help of Othram in hopes of identifying a suspect or suspects by using DNA collected from the crime scene. While they were able to produce a male DNA profile, there were no matches in CODIS. Investigators then turned to genetic genealogy and were able to identify Stephen Richard Hardy as one of the killers. The other suspect, Charlie Sneed, was also identified, but through a fingerprint recovered from a Coca-Cola can at the crime scene in 1983. Unfortunately, neither man would face justice because both were now dead. Sneed died in 2014 from natural causes and was basically a career criminal who spent 24 years in prison, starting in 1985, for aggravated kidnapping. Hardy's date of death is unknown, and the only offenses on his record were minor ones, such as public intoxication. If the men were still alive today, they would be arrested and charged with Toby's murder. Seath Tyler Jackson was born on February 3, 1996, in Bellevue, Florida. At the age of 15, he was living in the Summerfield area of Marion County, Florida, and was described as a kind-hearted, emotional, and deeply trusting individual. In December 2011, 14-year-old Seath began dating a girl named Amber Wright. Seath's parents weren't exactly happy about the relationship and found Amber to be somewhat manipulative. And of course, like most parents' intuition, they were spot on. In March of 2011, just 3 months into the relationship, They broke up after Amber cheated on Seath with 18-year-old Michael Bargo. Due to the lies from Amber, which we'll touch on soon, an immense hate grew between Seath and Michael. After the breakup, Seath and Amber began trash-talking each other on Facebook, with Seath accusing her of being a promiscuous meth addict, to which she replied, and I quote, "It takes a real man to accept being broken up with." She and Michael had also allegedly begun dating. Amber frequently stayed at her stepbrother Kyle Hooper's place, which was also where Michael lived, along with 18-year-old Charlie Eli. Charlie had moved the men in because she needed the money after her husband was locked up. It was around this time that Amber began convincing Michael that Seath had abused her while they were together. Seath was also about to have Kyle turn against him as well after his girlfriend, Alyssa, broke up with him over the phone, and when Kyle rushed over there, he found her in bed with Seath. Kyle left the home angry and stole Seth's bike in the process. Seath then allegedly threatened to burn down Kyle's home. At that point, with tensions at an all-time high, the group, consisting of Michael, Kyle, Amber, Charlie, and a friend of theirs, 20-year-old Justin Soto, came up with a plan to murder Seath. Michael was the mastermind, fueled by Amber's lies of abuse. The plan was for Amber to lure Seath to Charlie's home under the pretense that they could work things out, but she asked him to keep their meeting a secret. Seath was immediately suspicious and replied, "Amber, if you have me jumped, I will never give you the time of day." However, Amber was persistent and convinced him that she would never do such a thing and just wanted to get back together. So with that, Seath agreed to meet. When he arrived at Charlie's home on April 17, 2011, she answered the door and showed him to the living room. That's when Kyle and Justin came out of a back room and started beating him with a 2x4 and a wooden axe handle. Michael then shot Seath twice with his .22 caliber revolver. At this point, Seath was able to get away and ran out of the house and was almost to the road when Justin tackled him. Michael then shot him again. Kyle and Justin dragged him back inside and placed him in the bathtub, all the while continuing to beat him with the wooden objects. Once in the tub, they broke both his kneecaps in order to fit him in the sleeping bag they had. However, to their surprise, Seath was still alive, so Michael shot him several more times before finally putting him in the sleeping bag and setting it ablaze in a fire pit out back. Shockingly, 37-year-old James Havens, who was Amber and Kyle's stepfather, knew about the plot in advance, and even he agreed to help. On the morning of April 18th, he showed up with cinder blocks and cables in the back of his truck. The remains were then shoveled into 3 paint buckets and put into the back of James's truck. He then drove Justin and Michael to a rock quarry in Ocala, where they sunk the buckets with cinder blocks. The rest of the group stayed back at Charlie's home and used bleach to rid the trailer of evidence. The following day, when Seath failed to return home, his parents called and reported him missing. The investigation moved quickly, and within days they arrested Amber, Kyle, and Charlie and placed them all in the same holding cell. These geniuses then began talking about the murder and about how they felt Seath deserved it. Michael, on the other hand, went on the run and had James drive him to his out-of-town girlfriend's home in Stark, Florida. Michael was super proud of what he had done, still believing he had murdered an abuser, and bragged to everyone at his girlfriend's home about it, even the neighbor. On April 19th, police called up to Michael and arrested him. Once in jail, he continued bragging about the crime. Since it was determined that he was the primary shooter, he was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. Eventually, all 6 individuals were arrested for their involvement. Meanwhile, a search warrant was issued for Charlie's home. There, they found the murder weapon, along with the burnt remains in the fire pit. They also found Charlie's DNA in the blood mixture left behind in the bathroom, and Kyle's DNA in a blood mixture in the living room that also contained Seath's DNA. Furthermore, Michael's DNA was located in blood found on the kitchen ceiling. Before Kyle's arrest, he told his mother what he had done, but downplayed his involvement. She then called the police and told them what he had said and gave them information on the rock quarry, which allowed investigators to recover Seath's remains. Everyone, regardless of their age, was tried as adults. Amber, Kyle, Justin, and Charlie were all convicted of first-degree murder and given life sentences. As for James, he pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact, but it doesn't appear he's ever been sentenced. I even searched the Florida inmate database, but found no record of him. Michael received the biggest sentence, death. He currently remains on death row at the Union Correctional Institution in Florida, but at this time, no execution date has been set. Sherry Lynn Leighty was born on June 12, 1961. In 1984, she was a 23-year-old mother of 3, whose life revolved around her children and family. Sherry lived in Blair County, Pennsylvania, and was described as a dependable, caring individual who stayed closely connected to the people around her. Tragically, in the fall of that year, she would strangely disappear. On November 3, 1999, Sherry's father, Sheldon Dunn, reported her missing after not hearing from her for over a month. When investigators began looking into her disappearance, they discovered that the last time her family saw her was September 26. However, her father-in-law, Kenneth Wayne Leighty, said he last saw her on October 1st, when he dropped her off for work while on his way to his job. He then went on to tell them that Sherry had abandoned her 3 children to run away to Maine with a boyfriend. Since he was the last person to have allegedly seen her, they believed him and listed the case as a voluntary disappearance. Her family believed him as well, but over time they began to question the story, especially after weeks and months went by with no attempt from her to contact the children. Her husband found this very odd and suspicious. Her sister, Shelley Nagel, never believed the runaway story and felt that Kenneth was hiding something. In 2012, a detective at the department re-examined the case and was surprised to find significant holes in Kenneth's alibi, especially the fact that he was actually off work the entire week she disappeared, contradicting his early claim that he dropped her off on the way to work. Once they had that revelation, they decided to put wiretaps on Kenneth's phone and, in early 2013, got the break they were looking for. During a conversation between Kenneth and his son, Ellerin, Kenneth began to make incriminating remarks before saying, and I quote, "I did it. It was an accident." He was also caught saying that Sherry's body would likely be found on the family's hunting property in Warriors Mark Township, Pennsylvania. That same day, investigators went to Kenneth's home and took him in for questioning. However, a physical altercation broke out, leading to his arrest and charge for aggravated assault. This was actually a favor for investigators because it kept him in jail while they continued their investigation. Unfortunately, a search of the property a couple of weeks later turned up nothing, even after bringing in 20 cadaver dogs. So they decided to offer Kenneth a plea deal. Show us where she's buried, and we will limit the charge to third-degree murder. He agreed, and the following day, on May 11, 2013, he led them to her remains on the property. Shockingly, the property where she was found was a spot where Kenneth took Sherry's kids camping and hunting for years after her murder. As for what led to him killing her, he said he and Sherry got into a heated argument at his home on 19th Avenue in Altoona, Pennsylvania. He said the argument spiraled out of control, and he struck her in the head with a solid object that he believed was a bat or maybe a pole. He said he placed her body in his vehicle, and she died while he drove to the property in Warriors Mark Township where he buried her. He would never say what the argument was about, but his story of an alleged accident was proven false because a forensic anthropologist determined she died from multiple blunt force injuries to her skull. He then received a very light sentence of 7 to 14 years, which shocked Sherry's family, who called the sentence profoundly inadequate for the killing of a young mother of 3. He'll most likely serve the entire sentence because every attempt at parole has been denied, with the last one taking place in December of 2025. At this time, he's expected to be released in early 2027. Ashley Lauren Ellerin was born on July 16, 1978, in Los Altos, California. By the time she was 22, she was living in a rental home in the Hollywood Hills neighborhood in Los Angeles, California, and was a student at the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising. Tragically, in early 2001, a planned night out with Ashton Kutcher was ruined by a horrible tragedy. On the evening of February 21st, Ashton invited Ashley to be his date to a Grammy Awards after party. The two had met a few months earlier at a party, but Ashton was already involved with someone else. However, by early 2001, both Ashley and he found themselves single. After reconnecting, they scheduled their first date for the night of the Grammys. Ashton called Ashley at around 8:24 p.m. to inform her that he was running late. She told him it was fine because she was still working on her hair. That would be the last time he ever spoke to Ashley again. When he called her back later to say he was on his way, there was no answer. He found it strange, but drove to her house anyway, arriving at approximately 10:45 p.m. He knocked several times on the front door, but nobody answered. He then looked through a window and saw what appeared to be a red wine stain on the carpet. At the time, he said it didn't raise concerns, and he left the property believing she had changed her mind. He had no way of knowing that the reason he'd been stood up was much, much worse, and that the red wine stain he saw was actually Ashley's blood. The following morning, Ashley's roommate, Jennifer DeCito, returned home. Inside, she discovered Ashley's body near the bathroom doorway. At first, she believed Ashley was playing a prank on her, but as she got closer, she realized Ashley was covered in blood, and she immediately called 911. It was determined that Ashley had been stabbed 47 times. It was clear that the attack was intentional and extremely violent. Unfortunately, it would go unsolved for years. In April of 2008, another attack would break the case wide open. On April 28th, Michelle Murphy was attacked in her Santa Monica home by an unknown assailant. Thankfully, she was able to fight the man off, causing him to cut himself and leave behind blood at the scene. Using DNA evidence, they identified the man as Michael Gargiulo, a.k.a. the Hollywood Ripper. Gargiulo had a pattern of stalking women in their neighborhoods and attacking them inside their homes. He lived in the same neighborhood as Ashley, and it was discovered that prior to her murder, he had offered to help her fix a flat tire outside her home. He then continued showing up at the residence under the pretense of helping with repairs. We now know he was doing this to prey on his next victim, Ashley. On June 6, 2008, Gargiulo was arrested for the attempted murder of Michelle Murphy. 3 years later, he was charged in Ashley's case. In addition to Ashley's murder, Gargiulo was also connected to other killings, including Maria Bruno, who was murdered in her Hollywood apartment on December 1, 2005. He's also a suspect in the murder of Tricia Pacaccio in Glenview, Illinois. She was murdered on September 14, 1993, in Glenview. Gargiulo was just a teenager at the time and also lived in the neighborhood. During his trial for the murder of Ashley, Ashton Kutcher provided crucial testimony that helped establish a timeline of the night she was murdered. In August of 2019, Gargiulo was found guilty of first-degree murder and was formally sentenced to death in July of 2021. After Ashley's death, she was cremated, and her ashes were returned to her parents in Northern California.